And today we're going to be talking about practical ways to balance our blood sugar, why it's important, what blood sugar is, what is blood sugar. So, blood sugar is going to be our body's primary energy source. So, that's how we fuel every activity in the day. Um, we get this from our foods we eat. So, certain foods are going to have higher levels of blood sugar or sugar, and sometimes people confused, well, I didn't have sugar. I had a banana or I had a sweet potato or whatever that is. Carbohydrates convert into sugar. So if you're having a high carb meal or low carb meal, that's going to convert into sugar. So that's what blood sugar is the amount of sugar in our bloodstream. Now, having certain levels, when you wake up first thing in the morning, your blood sugar is pretty low. Again, when you eat food, especially rich in those carbohydrates, you're going to spike your blood sugar. Sugar in the bloodstream for a long period of time can become toxic and can create issues. So, what our bodies do is it creates this thing called insulin, and insulin opens up your cells, grabs the sugar, puts it inside the cells, and is able to be shuttled and used for energy. The problem is if you're type 1 diabetic or even type 2, you're not either producing insulin at all or you're not producing enough insulin. So those cells don't open up and that sugar builds up in the system, especially if you eat a standard American diet, high carbohydrate diet. Those sugars are adding up very quickly and they're not being packaged and moved to be used for energy. I hope that makes sense. So, the importance of blood sugar and what it does in the body is it's going to regulate things from our mood, our energy levels, our libido, our fertility, our hunger. So, and we'll get into symptoms if you have high or low and what that might look like. But pretty much glucose, and glucose is another terminology for blood sugar, it affects almost everything of how you feel minute by minute. So if you feel fatigued, if you just ate but you're hungry an hour later, if you're moody, cranky. I remember years ago when I was in a sales rep, and Meg, me, Duran, and Thomas went out to dinner. Duran, I'm calling you out. We could go out, or he could go hours without eating. And this is before I knew I had blood sugar issues. And he said, we're getting dinner, in an hour. Well, about 5 hours later, we got dinner, but I was getting shaky. I was really irritable. All these symptoms started coming up because my blood sugar was crashing. So if I knew that, I could have had a snack or something prior to that. So, a few things as far as two different major categories of blood sugar levels. We're going to have that hypoglycemia. So, that's going to be that very low blood sugar levels, and then the hyperglycemia. So, common symptoms, and maybe some of these kind of stand out to you: shakiness, brain fog, fatigue, cold hands and feet, tingling sensation if you feel like you stand up and you get a little bit dizzy, if you have a history of passing out. Those are common symptoms of low blood sugar. Sometimes the low blood sugar also goes hand in hand with low blood pressure. So those are really important to make sure that we address. Just because we don't have diabetes or it's not high doesn't mean that it's not a concern. It can actually be very, very dangerous. So making sure we have our levels high enough. Now, hyperglycemia could be like thirst, fatigue, our bodies don't heal quick enough. And then obviously, when you have elevated levels, that can lead to prediabetes and diabetes as well. And I will throw in there PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's a very common condition in women where we have this insulin resistance. And just kind of we talked about insulin being that cell that opens up. To grab the sugar and put it inside. If you have insulin resistance, your body is not as sensitive to the insulin. It's not opening up. And so you might be secreting insulin, but it's not doing its job properly. As far as testing, you can kind of pay attention to your symptoms, some of those symptoms that I mentioned earlier, but there's also two major ways to get tested. You might, if you know a diabetic, they've done the finger prick, and that's a pretty accurate way that you can buy this at a CVS, a Walgreens, and you just do a finger prick, a little bit of blood comes out and you can check your numbers. Usually, if you are below 70, that's considered hypoglycemic. Doesn't mean you're hypoglycemic forever. It's just in that moment you have low levels. Um, and I think I don't know the upper level off the top of my head. I think it's like above 190, could be hyper, but it depends too if you have food in your system or you don't. The second way, and I think this is the coolest way, and it is now something that's very available for anybody, is this little device right here. And this is called the CGM, and this means a continuous glucose monitor. So this actually checks my levels minute by minute while I'm sleeping, when I'm eating, everything like that. This used to only be available if you're a diabetic. Now, pretty much anybody can get it. If you're interested, message me on Teams and I can kind of get you connected with the right person. We are going to have a podcast coming out more about this. But the cool thing about this is checking minute by minute. I can see my fasting levels. I can see what happens overnight. When I'm working out, and alarms can also go off if you go too low or if you go too high. Now, let's get into the good stuff. So, how do we practically balance our levels with our food? So, if you go to the next one, generally speaking, and I might have, okay. So there's three main macronutrients. We have our protein, our fat, and our carbohydrates. And what I mentioned before, carbs turn into sugar. We want carbs in the diet, especially for gut health, for energy purposes, especially if you're an athlete, if you're nursing. It's really important we have carbohydrates, but we want to make sure we don't ever have those carbohydrates by themselves. I'm meaning if you're going to have some grapes, have it with a fat and protein. If you're going to have toast, put butter on it. I wouldn't, if you're going to put jam is more carbohydrates. We need to balance that out with a fat and a protein. So making sure you have a representative from each one of these categories, and ideally having the protein and fat a little bit higher. Most people tend to skew it, the carbohydrates are higher. Now, this again is to help balance our blood sugar. So I think I gave a few different options of meals and options that we can do that are going to be balancing our blood sugar. So we have people who love more of a sweet breakfast and a savory breakfast. Generally speaking, if you like sweeter breakfast, you probably consume a very high carbohydrate breakfast or high sugar breakfast. So for that savory individual, a really good way to balance out that breakfast, again, we want the protein, we want the fat, and we want the carbohydrates. Little bonus point if you add fiber. So having an omelet, I would advise having more than 2 eggs. A lot of women that I work with, they only have about two eggs in their breakfast. It's generally not enough protein to help stabilize their levels. So opt for 3 eggs if you can. Vegetables, turkey, avocado. If you do want a little bit of carbs in there, have some fresh berries or sourdough toast with a little bit of butter on there. So as you can see from this, oh, I just saw something about 100% chocolate. I'm we'll get to that in a second. Yes, so you could see this savory breakfast has protein, fat, and carbs. That is a fantastic breakfast. If you are wearing a CGM, you're going to be able to eat this breakfast and notice your glucose curve be very stable, more like a kiddie roller coaster instead of like a Knott's Berry Farm one. We want this really stable one. Now, for sweet, chia pudding is an awesome way to have a balanced breakfast. You can even take your coconut milk and put chia seeds in it the night before. And what those chia seeds are doing is it's going to absorb that liquid. It's going to create this gel-like substance that's actually going to coat the intestine. So it's kind of like your Drano in your sink. It's going to help lubricate that intestine. So your stools move, your motility, everything is really good. It also is a great source of omega-3s, healthy fats, and fiber. You can add some raspberries, which are low carbohydrate, a little scoop of protein powder to make sure you're getting enough protein in that breakfast. Again, protein can be a little bit controversial. I would say if you can, aim for 20 to 30 grams of protein with that breakfast. People have different opinions, but I think that's going to be kind of an ideal sweet spot. Optional. I know 100% dark chocolate is not for everyone. It tastes like dirt for the most of everybody, but I would say you probably didn't have coffee and love the taste on the first sip. It's an adjustment, but there's a lot of good nutrients in the dark chocolate. And the nice thing about that is you're getting the fat without the sugar. And if you do some shavings or cut it up, you get the flavor again without that sugar. Or you can do a drizzle of almond butter. So those are going to be some really good ideas for breakfast. Oh, and then an additional way to support your blood sugar after you eat is to move your body for at least 10 minutes. That could be a walk. Go walk around the block with your dog. I'm sorry if you struggle, if you have to get on any calls with me, I'm probably doing push-ups on a call. Elizabeth and April can attest to that. But trying to move your body, even just standing after breakfast, is going to be something helpful. One thing you could do is just clean up the kitchen a little bit more vigorously. Kind of like, get on your hands and knees or do a little bit of laundry. You're not only benefiting the house, but you're also benefiting your body. All right. Okay, so next meal, so that's breakfast. So lunch, let me see if I can move this. Okay, so one thing that I do when I'm making my meal is my very first priority when I have a bowl is I'm going to fill it with non-starchy vegetables. I want to get as much vegetables as I possibly can. So when I'm having a salad, I fill the bowl with salad. Then I add my protein, then I add my fat, and then I top it off with carbs. Again, I tend to do slightly lower carbs, but it just depends on what your needs are. Are you trying to improve your gut health? Are you trying to improve your blood sugar? Are you working on longevity, anti-aging? Depends on your needs. But generally speaking, I think majority of individuals do too much carbs. So filling your plate with that non-starchy vegetables, prioritize protein. So chicken, steak, fish, tofu, beans. Again, beans are protein, but they also have carbohydrates. So just keep that in mind. And then top with the source of healthy fats. One of my favorite things is for a salad, I just make my own salad dressing. So I mix apple cider vinegar, which is like a secret weapon for lowering your blood sugar. And then you can use avocado oil. Oh, wait, we just have okay. And a little bit of mustard, mix that up, and it's a great salad dressing. So dinner, same kind of concept. Filling your plate first with a ton of those vegetables. I wouldn't say that there is a limit on how many non-starchy vegetables you want on your plate. If you can eat a pound of broccoli, I don't see anything wrong with that. Go for it. So filling up your plate with non-starchy vegetables, adding protein, again, your carbohydrates, and then topping with topping with healthy fats. Broccoli, if you try different ways, if you steam it, put some good seasonings on it, maybe put some cheese on it. There are different ways that it can be helpful or delicious. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've mentioned, so here are some other ways to balance blood sugar naturally, a few that we've already gone over, and these are going to be really beneficial. Like you will see the needle move further of balancing your blood sugar. Prioritize protein. Seeing if you can make that a higher priority with your meals. If you are that individual that maybe has 1 egg with breakfast or 2 eggs, see if you can move it to 3. Or if you only want your 2 eggs, can you add extra protein into that omelet? If you're going to do a protein shake in the morning, moving 10 minutes after you eat. Again, it doesn't have to be a HIIT workout or a Barry's boot camp. Going on a walk is good enough. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is building more lean muscle is going to be monumental for managing your blood sugar levels. So think of your muscle kind of as like a locker room or like a storage center. Our body has to store glucose in a few different areas, and muscle is one of them. So the more muscle you can build, the more efficient your blood sugar is processed and managed in the body. Fiber in every meal, that is a huge one. What it's going to do is it's kind of going to go in the body and create this netting in your intestines. So when the sugar comes in, it doesn't absorb directly into your intestines. It's actually filtered through this netting. So any type of fiber that you can get. Soluble fiber is going to be, I always get that mixed up and I know I shouldn't. Soluble fiber is more of like that gelatinous kind. It's going to be kind of that fine net. Whereas insoluble fiber is going to be kind of, I don't know, you think of maybe think of bricks and what's the called? Not mortar. I'm thinking something else. Sorry, it was a long morning. And then the last thing is apple cider vinegar prior to your meal. That is going to be beneficial. Key with that is if you're drinking your apple cider vinegar, one, don't ever have it by itself. Make sure it's diluted in water. But if it's still burning when you're taking it down, dilute it even more. It is not going to change the effectiveness, the potency of the apple cider vinegar if you drink a cup of it versus a gallon of it. So pouring it into your water, I will also do the clinical drink mix and I'll dump that in, or sometimes, or Inner Eco Perfect. You can put that in there. I'll put electrolytes in there and I'll drink that down. They say that, or experts say that if you have it just in the beginning of the day, that can be just as beneficial. But I try to do apple cider vinegar prior to each meal. There's research that shows that it helps with your glucose and your insulin levels. Any questions, any comments on the podcast, any takeaways from that? Does anybody already do all this stuff? Is there a substitute for broccoli? If you don't like broccoli, you absolutely don't need to do it. I think as long as you can get any sort of increasing. So teaser, next season of the podcast is all going to be dedicated to gut health. And it's going to be beyond, I mean, we're going to get into some deep conversations, but the more diversity of vegetables you have in a day, I think the goal is 30 different vegetables in a week. You are going to improve your gut microbiome. So if you don't like broccoli, try something else. You don't have to like them all. Ooh, broccolini. You know what, too, is if you take broccoli, steam it or bake it, and then pull it out. So it's going to be like a twice baked. You're going to take a fork and you're going to smush it down, put a little bit of Parmesan cheese and maybe some garlic powder on there, put it back in, and the smushing of it down is going to kind of take the Parmesan and make it caramelize and kind of give this like crackly. I know that they do that with potatoes, but try that out with broccoli and tell me you don't like it after that. I don't know the names to 30 different veggies.
Someone asked, what is your opinion on drinking super greens?
So I think, I don't know super greens. I don't, if that's a particular brand. I think greens powders are phenomenal. I hope one day we can take our capsules and do powders. I like potions and just throwing it into smoothies. I am all about doing greens powders. I just maybe double check that there's no added fruit or anything, or not added fruit, added sugar, or maybe gums or anything like that. But I don't know that particular brand, but I think if you can add greens into your smoothies, anything like that, it is absolutely fantastic. And there's so many different ways that you can hide the flavor of that. I mean, you can even make, I just think of baby stuff, but you can mix it into yogurt and put it into like these little pops and freeze it. And so if you want a treat, just pull that out and it's like a yogurt frozen pop. Veggie intake from fruit pouches. Again, one thing that I would really press, if you are working hard or if you're trying to be more conscious of your blood sugar, one big key thing I would take away is do not have your carbohydrates by themselves. So if you want fruit, have it with a handful of almonds. Check this. If you go to a party and you want a piece of cake, we're not saying no to the cake, but can you go have a piece of like a turkey cheese wheel with that? Making sure that you're getting, it doesn't have to go with that. Like you don't have to have an almond drizzle on top of that cake, but how can we make sure that in our stomach, we have protein and fat in addition?
We did have some questions towards the beginning about current, like what people are eating for breakfast right now. If you have any recommendations on if that's good or to balance it more. So I eat a hard-boiled egg each morning for breakfast. Is that good enough? Should she be doing more?
Okay, I see that from Keisha. So
Yes.
I do, and it says I eat hard boiled eggs. So I'm hoping it's more than one. And again, it matters your goals, but generally speaking, especially women, I'm sorry, it's a lot of women do not eat enough protein, do not eat enough calories. We're actually under eating. And if you do struggle, and Keisha, I've never seen you, we've never had a chance to communicate, but a lot of times if we do struggle with hunger after a meal, if we struggle with weight issues, hormonal imbalance, and we're like, we can't add more food, it's actually quite the opposite. From all the research that I've done, years ago, we were about eating every 2 hours in smaller portions to balance out your blood sugar for gut health. We hear about the benefits of intermittent fasting. Actually, having bigger meals spread throughout the day is actually going to be more beneficial for your blood sugar, for your gut health, for your inflammation. So, what I would recommend, without knowing any of your biology or your background, is I would see, can we do 2 eggs? Can we do 3 eggs? And maybe that's too much to even start with. Can we make our breakfast? You want your breakfast so that you aren't ready to eat for another 3, 4, ideally 4 hours. So if you're hungry 2 hours later, that's an indicator that it's not a hefty enough breakfast.
So we have two people that have asked, Addison and now Jalen, any restrictions on seasonings?
Great
Yes.
question. I would just turn it around and make sure that they're real ingredients, that there's, again, no gums in there. I know that there's a lot of controversy on seed oils right now. But just making sure that it's a pure, if a good seasoning. If it has like extra stuff like cornstarch, you might notice some gut irritants. But if it's pretty much garlic powder, onion powder, cayenne, paprika, add as much as you want. I don't see any issues with that. Some of those pre-made ones will have added salt. I do think there is absolutely a place to salt, especially if you have adrenal issues, anxiety, hormonal imbalance. Chances are you're probably underdoing the salt unless you have some sort of diagnosis of hypertension, heart issues, and you need to be conscious of the salt. But I think there's a lot of individuals who are more skewed to not consuming enough salt, especially if you sweat often, which, by the way, side tangent, if a tangent is side, but if you are someone who does not sweat, that's not actually a good thing. We want to sweat. That's how our body detoxifies. So if you're like, I'm not just a sweater, we got to get all that stuff out. So dry brushing, saunas, moving your body is going to be really helpful. I don't know how that went that way, but maybe because it's on the next season. So
I think we have time for one more. April asked, that did confuse me from the podcast with the sunflower shop guy. He said eat every 2 to 3 hours if you have blood sugar issues. But I've also heard don't snack as much and stick to making your meals more hearty, especially if you have gut issues.
Totally. And such a good question. And I love Brian. I think he's fantastic. And that's the hard thing about interviewing. You're going to get people that you agree with, and things change. I think maybe try out what works best for your body. Try a CGM, try finger pricking and seeing what works out. Ultimately, I think if we are so dependent on needing to eat every 2 hours, to me, that's not sustainable. That's not something that, I shouldn't need to go back to the fridge and eat every 2 hours. I don't think, I'm in a spot that I want to fast for 8, 10 hours. But I think to be able to increase that time frame of when my body needs food, I should be able to eat food and it should be able to sustain me for a little bit longer than 2 hours. But there's different opinions on that. And I would say do what works best for you. Maybe try, look into different research, into different experts. I do have another podcast coming out. And so that's a hard thing with podcasts is you get different opinions. And I like that. I want to bring on other opinions, not just one. And they say, no snacking, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's it. I had another lady I interviewed, and we're not publishing the podcast, but she said, I want you to eat so much protein, you're sick of looking at protein. I don't necessarily agree with that. So you got to find that balance of, again, what works best for you, what helps optimize your well-being, what you feel good with, after you eat that meal, are you ready to go tackle the day, or do you want to go sit on the couch? Are you hungry an hour later? Really starting to tap into starting to become more aware of your body, your mood, your energy, your hunger levels. I think that's going to be a good indicator, and journaling is going to be helpful for that as well. So. And then next week, Shelby is going to do a deep dive on glucose stability. So that's not something you want to miss out. I know we're at 9. We did not touch in supplements, glucose stability, and berberine. If you add those with your meal, if you want to if you don't want to take it every time, but you just take it with your high carb meals, you are going to see a really big difference. And I'm doing a test on that too. So I'll showcase that on
And
social.
that's in 2 weeks. Next Friday, we are closed. Everyone enjoy your Good Friday. So in 2 weeks, Shelby will be doing that presentation. Thank you so much, Nikki. I think everyone learned a lot, and I love all the questions we're getting. And the funny comments of, can I just take my fruit and veggie gummies? All good. So,
If you're going to do the gummies, eat it with fat and protein. That's all I got to say.
all right. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.